Hello and welcome to the Show Up Dad podcast, the podcast for tradesmen. Today I got a special guest. His name is Will Monzingo. Will is no stranger to this podcast. He's been a guest. He's been a friend of mine. And Will is just an awesome human, just a great lineman, great father. And I'm just so happy to have him on this podcast. Today we're going to discuss takeaways from a recent guest we had on here. His name was Nathan Padilla. Nathan was a solid podcast. So I highly recommend you fathers out there, if you haven't listened to Nathan Padilla's talk about influence, a father's influence in the home, I highly suggest you guys go on there and really listen to it. I mean, there's so much information in there. I can't even fit it down in 5 pages. That's why we started this Lineman Chronicles, is to discuss these different speakers on here and put it into perspective in a tradesman's way, in a lineman's way, or for other tradesmen out there who are listening to this, just to kind of take out the nuggets that we can use as fathers. I mean, this is what this is for. This is information. You know, a lot of times as linemen, as tradesmen, as fathers, we don't like to ask questions. So this is an opportunity for us to ask questions and listen to some of these answers out there without having to really put ourselves out there. That's why I do this with this podcast. And I just want to welcome Will Monzingo again. Will, thank you for being a part of this show, brother.
David, I really appreciate you having me back on here. And I pray that this is of value to any one person. If one person listens to this and it helps them, then God is blessed. And I'm absolutely so thankful for everything you're doing, and that God's blessing you in such a way that you're really reaching a lot of people. And this is a need. And it's not just for tradesmen, but you know, everybody's got to start somewhere. And whether you're a tradesman or you work in a restaurant or whatever it is, you're a dad, you're out there, you're making it happen for your family to the best of your abilities. You know, whether you have your kids, you don't have your kids, you're single father, married, divorced, whatever. This is important. Now, of course, from, you know, my point of view, it's definitely from a tradesman point of view. Mm-hmm. So that isn't a limiting factor, I don't think. This is a tool. And I think a lot of times as linemen, we get stuck, tradesmen, period, we get stuck in a rut. You know, we're comfortable with what we know and we stop. And I believe this from Nathan Padilla is a tool. Let's learn to use tools that may make us a little uncomfortable. Let's use tools that initially are outside what we're thinking or how we react, and see if it will help us grow. Because the more growth we have as men, the more growth we can have for our families, and the better servant leaders we become in our lives, our families' lives, parents even, and also in our communities. This has ramifications that stretch to the end of eternity.
I like that. Yeah, that's awesome that you touched base on that. There is ramifications in life and everything we do, negative and positive. And you know, I like that you touch base on that. And, you know, this is exactly what this is. This was a tool. This was set up to help the men out there who are providing for their families, who are busting their butts, who are leaving it all at the workplace and don't have enough at the home when they get home to give to their families. So let's go ahead and start. Nathan Padilla, we had him on the last 2 podcasts, I guess it would be. Yeah, 2 podcasts ago. And Nathan Padilla talked a little bit about influence, and so much information in there, Will. I mean, I got like 3 pages of his stuff, you know.
Yep, same here.
One of the things I thought that was really cool that he talked about was around the 17-minute mark. He talked about making a choice between addiction to crack and his son. He had his son in one hand and a crack pipe in the other. And when he said that, I just couldn't believe it. It was like, holy smokes, this guy's legit. I mean, yes. Just to see the level of addiction he was going through. I mean, I think he even spoke about his habit was feeding the monster was 1 ounce of Coke a day. That's a lot of blow. I
Wow.
mean, yeah. And then not only that, to top that off, being homeless, not having money, having to hustle to feed that monster, that's insane, bro.
Well, and something that really stuck to me is he said a little shortly thereafter,
Mm,
in his mind, he did good for his kid. You know, he got his kid Air Jordans and so on and so forth.
yeah.
And that allowed him in his head to justify poisoning his body and his mind.
Mm,
And it was astounding because, we tend to put in perspective alcohol, drugs, work, pornography, blah, 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 right?
mm,
The problem is it's all the same thing. It's it's first of all from a Christian point of view, it's sin.
mm,
But more importantly, it's an intrusion into our lives that keeps us from being better at anything, our jobs, our families, our wives, our in our community. It's something that draws us away. And having him say that, that he was feeding that habit, that monster, no matter what, but he was okay with it because he was only poisoning himself.
mm.
And the fact of the matter is, we forget this, that not one of us has this sickness or sin to ourselves. We are truly that ripple in a pond. We have so many people that we influence and that we've been influenced by, and that it just meet us as acquaintances. And we forget that our problem never stays with us. Sure, we may be able to hide it for a little while, but it always comes out. The Bible says your sin will find you out. It will always come to the light. And that's an absolute fact. And
Mhm.
when it does, we forget, we get so self-involved, and we forget that it affects everybody. And we get stuck just, oh, poor me. Oh, it's just me. And that was revelatory. And honestly, I would like to thank Nathan for his honesty and forthrightness. I mean, he had some stuff in there that just blew my mind. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, me too. I mean, I liked when you touched on, you know, when he was talking about those Jordans, right? And his mom asked him, "Well, if you love your son, why don't you stop doing drugs?" And his response is exactly what you said. I buy him Jordans.
yep,
I love my son. I put poison in me, not in him. And for him to see where he was
yeah,
at that moment, he didn't see his level. He didn't see his value as a father at that moment. He didn't see his
no,
purpose, and just to see where he was then to where he is now today, and seeing when he learned about his purpose, one of the things he talked about is that when his dad died, right?
mhm,
His dad passed away. That was the catalyst for him to turn to drugs. He talked about smoking crack at the funeral at like, what was it, like 13, I think?
yeah, sixth
And
grade.
sixth grade, he smoked crack with his cousins. He threw up and he asked for another hit. And right there in that moment, he knew he was hooked. And he did it out of the loss of his father. That's how much he loved his father. That's how much he respected his father. And at that moment, he hated God. He was just pissed off. 13-year-old. He didn't know any better. He was just angry. He had just lost the most significant, influential man in his life, his father. To where that happened, it caused him to this downward spiral to where having a son, he actually started to live for his son. I think that was amazing. You know what I mean? When he really reached that understanding that he needed to be a better dad, to give his son a better dad. What do you think about that?
Well, you hit on some things. When he talks about losing his father after they had an argument that morning,
Mm-hmm.
I can feel the guilt, and kids and adults get hung up on the guilt. Yeah, and it's a pathway to chaos in one's life.
Mm-hmm.
But also, he gave kudos to his parents. He talked about how great his dad was and how great his mom was and how strong they were and how they moved him out, to somewhere else. They stayed in touch with their community, their family,
Mm-hmm.
but they tried everything they could to give their kids that better chance, that step up.
Yeah.
And what do? That's what we do. We want to make more money. We want our family to have better. We want them to have more. We want to live in a good, safe neighborhood and all these things that we're doing. And we've got to remember, it's the intent of the heart. It's the connection. It's never the goods. It's always the glory. And the glory is being that present father. That father has to be there. And his dad was there, and it did. It totally messed him up. I think it's really good that, he's had enough life to look back on it. And I'm sure none of this happens, as we go through the trials and struggles of our lives. We look back over our shoulders and we learn a little bit each time. Mm-hmm. But like you said, he had that realization that he had a son. I've got to be better for my son. And he said something that's so important, because he wanted to do better for his child, and he was still a struggling addict. And we've got to remember, we're not perfect.
No,
we're not on a pedestal. In fact, most times the pedestal falls down on top of our heads. Mm-hmm. So even if we are struggling with something, whatever it is, I mean, we could sit here for an hour and talk about the things that lead men away from what they should be doing as their calling by God for being a husband and a father, right?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, he was an addict and he still knew. And we all know. I mean, in our heart of hearts, we're doing men. We know we should be doing more. We just get stuck in our own struggles sometimes. And we've got to remember that you never step back. He was fighting an addiction, and he was trying to raise his son by himself, and he kept at it, And none of us are a complete success overnight. And we got to remember, failure is an opportunity to do better, plain and simple.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you said that. You're absolutely right. There is no such thing as mastery, especially in fatherhood. All we can do is put in the work. It's going to be hard work. And guess what? You can get better at it. And that's what Nathan did. He put in that work. He had a purpose. He figured out what his purpose was. That was his son. He wanted to be better for his son. So he started putting these things into motion that were catalysts for him to change his life and for the betterment, for positive. I like when he talked about how his dad led by example, and his dad would wake him up to go to work at 5 a.m. He didn't like, Saturday mornings, he didn't like it. But at that time, he was instilling work ethic. We talked about that recently on another podcast with Andy Aranda. And we talked about how right now our generation, or not our generation, but the generations that are coming up, these children, they don't have no work ethic. They don't want to work. They don't want to work hard, and to see that Nathan saw that was a major play in his eyes by his dad, and for him to be able to see that and want to implement that into his life. Even though his dad was gone, he still saw that work ethic, which paralleled him to be a better dad, and also allowed him to put that same work ethic into better himself and be successful at what he's doing now, helping other people. That's a beautiful thing, So it's pretty cool that his dad led by example in that way. I like when, go ahead. Sorry.
A really good a point on that real quick is, the Bible says, raise them up in the way that they should know, and they'll return to it. Mm-hmm. And that right there is a perfect example. He went through quite a bit of his young adulthood under an addiction. Yeah. But he goes back and he references what he did with his father. And just like you said, he didn't like it when he was that age, but he recalls that. And I think as fathers, we've got to remember, take a moment, be the moment, be there in their moment, have them present with you, and you be present with them. We don't know which small thing, just like that for him, came back around in his life and drove him. We don't know, but we do owe it to our children to have those opportunities, and we owe it to ourselves too, because we want to be parents of adult children that are succeeding, right?
Absolutely.
We definitely want that. And we want to be able to not claim it all, but we want to be able to have them say they remembered something like that. Dad, this. Remember, Dad? What about that? You know, and that's verification. And can we do it every day? No. Would we like to do it every day? Yes. Same time though. Just try to make an effort somewhere, sometime. I mean, if you're on the road, you're tramping, when you come home, take a day and sit outside, you know, stay away from everybody. Get your head in the game. Stop going from work in the drive or the plane ride, coming home, walking through that door in, like you said, with your wife, work mode, and everybody reacts to work mode. So your entire weekend or week or whatever time you're at home from being on the off the road is already predicated right there. And I know later he talks about walking away. And, you know, I wish someone would have told me, walk away. You know, before you go in there, you get that relationship with your wife and your children and say, hey, just give me some downtime. I got to get my head right for you. Not get my head, I'm thinking right. Get my head right for you. Get out of that mode of go, 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 happen, happen, happen. You know, me, I. Yeah, it's astounding. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you said that because I mean, the guy hit so many different points there with, just being that intentional dad to being engaged, to being committed and responsible to, I mean, though that's the core values that we talk about on the Show Up Dad, right? Being engaged, being responsible, and a committed father.
Mhm.
And he put all three of those into play. And he's celebrating the fruit of that with his son now. I liked what he talked about. He talked about we need to know how to influence our children. And that's based off of how they're wired. Each kid is going to be different. And that really, like, a light bulb went off to me. I mean, I understand that they're different, but the same parenting I do for my 7-year-old is going to be different from my 5-year-old. And you, as fathers, being there, being intentional, being committed and responsible, you're going to see how that kid is. It's the same way back. Let's take it a step further. When you have an apprentice or tradesman or whatever, you have someone underneath you. Okay. You kind of watch that dude, watch that kid, whatever, and you kind of see how he works. And then you kind of see how he's going to respond. Some kids respond better to, you know, to letting them build it themselves. Some kids need to be told and
Sure.
you know what I mean? And I'm sure you've seen that as just having an apprentice of your own. You know what I mean? Some
Yeah.
apprentices are different. That's the same thing with our kids. Our kids are different. Not each and every one are going to have the same learning patterns. And it's up to us as fathers having that influence with them, being committed, being responsible, being there and engaged with them to figure out that level of influence, to figure out how our children are wired, you know?
I agree. You know, you brought up something very interesting with the apprentice thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was always very able to be very patient with my apprentices
Mm-hmm.
because I would put forth my what I expected,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would put forth the effort to teach them. But somewhere in there, I got disconnected as a father when I got home. I should have honestly, you know, if you can't disconnect completely, think of your children as the most important apprentice you've ever had in your life, the most important helper you've ever had in your life. If you can take the time and patience to train them, why can't you take that time and patience to look at your children and look at their needs and look at each, like you said, each child is different. You don't all, there's no, this is the line. And that's where you'll well, the 3-year-old isn't going to understand it like the 5-year-old, like the 10-year-old, like the 30-year-old,
Yeah.
And that right there, and that's such good advice. And you tradesmen out there, think about that. Try to instill that. I wish someone would have kicked me in the head and said, "Hey, your kids are apprentices. They're looking to you as the leader for the rest of their lives, not just to get through a trade and move on and do their own thing. You are their leader. They are your apprentices. They are the most fantastic, the most needy, the most gracious, the most loving. They are the best apprentice you could ever have. So if you need to put it in perspective, treat them like an apprentice. Don't, some, like you said, you give them step by step. And other ones, you hand it to them and say, go for it. But you've got to learn, just like with our apprentices, to say to each of them, hey, great job. It might work a little better this way. You might want to try that next time. And as apprentice, you say, no, dude, you're going to kill yourself. Stop it. But with our kids, we are protecting them, but we've got to give them that latitude to fail and to be uplifted when they do fail, not to throw down on them, not to cast eyes upon them, not to cast words upon them, but to say, hey, that didn't work out, but how about this next time? Put it in their head and let them work it out. I as a father spent too much time telling my kids what to do and not listening to who they were and how they were learning, how they were reacting. I treated it as one line. That's it. And it's completely a false doctrine for fatherhood. There is no one line. You can't draw lines or boxes around your kids. You've got to stand there and say, well, my oldest has a kind heart and they're more forgiving. And you just go down the lines. And, fortunately, I'm given the opportunity with adult children to start dealing with them as they are now. And there's ramifications from what happened in their past with me as their father, as this dictator, but they're functioning adults. They're hardworking, they're strong, and their likes and dislikes are totally different than mine. And that, I think, is, if I could have learned that sooner, I think I could have reveled in it even more than I do now. The individual child, not the group children, the individual child, and my responsibility to each individual child.
That's awesome that you were able to see that, Will. One of the things that really touched me is frustration. He talked about frustration. Do you remember that? Dude, that was deep, man. And I mean, I'm guilty of it myself with apprentices, with my children. You get them to a point where they're so frustrated that they just want to quit. And that's not good. And then we get mad at them when you're like, what do you mean quit? What do you mean you don't want to do this? And then you start really digging in. And I thought he was awesome when he talked about how Dr. Henry Cloud talked about the emotion of frustration and how it's needed emotion for learning. And then he started talking about how when we're frustrated, we are plugging in something from our memory, something that should work, but it's not working. And that's where we get frustrated. And I see that with my kids. They've seen it done one way. They know it works one way. And then when it doesn't work and it fails to work that same way that they've already got in memory, they get frustrated and they want to throw it down and they want to throw a tantrum, right? Sometimes. Yeah. And what's the next thing that we do as fathers? Pick that up. Don't do that. What's wrong with you? And then, or you spank them, and that's totally not okay, as we learned. So,
but did you know that? I mean, honestly,
honestly,
were you ever taught that? Were you ever told that?
Nope.
No, I mean, your kids react and it's a negative reaction, but it wasn't a negative reaction. It was them having a struggle. So yeah, we absolutely,
it's crazy. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, they're frustrated because they're learning. I
Yes.
never looked at it that way. You
No,
know what I
never,
mean?
never.
They are learning. Frustration causes you to try something else, right? And what does that lead to? A second emotion, which is anger. Anger usually causes you to want to change, right? To do something
Yeah.
different because it's not working. And anger causes that change. Most people don't change until they're angry enough about it anyways. So that's what's happening when our kids are throwing these fathers, listen up, man. So when our kids are frustrated, our apprentices are frustrated, it's because it's something new to them and they're in the process of learning. So when they get angered and they start cussing and throwing stuff or whatever, I mean, apprentices, I'm talking about cussing. Your kids shouldn't be cussing. You know what I mean? But, they're getting frustrated. They're showing that secondary emotion of anger. Then that's going to cause them to change. It's going to cause them to try something different. And that's the whole process of learning. I thought that was amazing that he touched on that because I had never looked
That
at it
that
that way
is
at all.
that that's big for us as parents and fathers,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also big for ourselves.
Yep,
You know,
absolutely.
Instead of reveling, I was always a rage freak. I loved my anger, and I used it as a driving tool. I was it's what made me focus even harder. I would get it. I would make it happen no matter what. But then when I took it to my kids, it was just anger. There was no fruit to it. There was no fruit whatsoever. It was just anger because what drove me, I was thinking it would drive them. Just like when you got an apprentice and some respond to an occasional yell and a swift kick in the butt, and other ones shut down. They're done. I mean,
Yeah.
it's over. And there again, you've got to, it's the same situation with two different groups. Your family, are you giving them the anger or are you allowing them to have anger without you responding in anger?
Mm-hmm.
It- that's huge. I mean, that is those are words that we could all use in our lives, and most importantly as fathers and honestly as husbands.
Mm.
I mean,
Yes.
I mean, he talks a lot in there about listening.
Yeah.
And that was, to this day, I'm still learning how to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know who said it, but they had said that most people aren't listening because they're waiting for their turn to talk.
Hmm.
And holy mackerel, you've talked about three-way communication and so on and so forth. And it sounds corny.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it on the line, you're taking a one shot somewhere,
Yeah.
or you're doing an outage or something. And three-way communication is a piece of cake. And it sounds corny to take it home. But you
It
know what?
works.
It works. And
Yeah.
if it works in a high stress situation, couldn't it work even better in a low stress situation? Of course, at first your kids are going to look at you sideways and go, "What on earth is wrong with you?" Your wife is going to go, "Are you on crack?" But at the same time, it works. I mean, the tools we do have as
Mm-hmm.
tradesmen that work in our trade so easily come across. That's what I noticed about Nathan is his life experiences were tools,
Yes.
some good, some bad. But he took those tools and he put them into his life and started using them everywhere. He uses them in his counseling and everything. He uses these tools. I never once thought about using the tools I learned in my trade to take them home and use them for the same way.
Hmm. For a positive way.
Absolutely a positive way. It would have, I'm not going to say it wouldn't have changed the divorce or anything in my life, but I think I would have been a lot more present, a lot more often
Mm-hmm.
if I could have learned to listen
Hmm.
instead of demand. I could have been a better father if I could have learned sooner, quicker, earlier to listen, to not demand, to not always, and as parents, sometimes you do demand and there are ramifications, but
Mm-hmm.
the art of listening is huge
Oh yeah.
in relationships. I mean, parental relationships, spousal relationships, work relationships, man, listening, huge.
Hmm. And and not only just listening, right? Listening, you know, in one ear out the other, right? But really hearing
Yeah.
and understanding. Um,
Intentional. Yes.
intentional. Yeah, exactly. Intentional. Giving your spouse or your kids that moment to really let you know how they're feeling at that time. I tried that the other day with my son. He was having a meltdown. Didn't understand why. And instead of getting mad at him, telling him, what the heck are you crying for? Like I would have done in the past.
Sure.
I sat him down. I said, okay, what's going on, little man? How are you feeling? What's really going on with you? How are you feeling? And just to be able to see him open up, giving him that level to be able to open up to me was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was truly, truly amazing. This is my middle son, Lucas. And he opened up to me and he let me know that he was hurt. He was hurt that, mama has to go to work. He was upset with that. You know what I mean? That he doesn't get to see her because his whole entire life, mama was home always. Daddy was
Yeah.
always on the road and stuff
Yeah.
like that. You know, and fortunately, my wife was able to. We decided that she would get a job to help her out. That's part of her therapy for her getting better from
Sure.
Lyme. You know what I mean? To be
Yep.
able to be around people and be out of the house and just kind of just socialize and get her mind off of that negativity of just sitting there wallowing about this thing that was attacking her body
Yeah.
both physically and mentally. So we decided that she would get a job and she could be able to be out there in public and just try to get her mind off of things and stuff like that. Well, the kids weren't used to that, so he was a little bit brokenhearted. You know what I mean? So we sat there, we talked about it, and I let him be able to come to me with his hurts and his questions, wondering when mom was going to come home and stuff like that. And it was just amazing to be able to do that with your son. You know what I mean? Before I would have never
Yeah.
done that. I would have shut him down big time, and that's just me not being able. And I'll admit that as a man, sometimes we can't fix things. So for me, I would get angry, just like he was talking about. Why do we get angry? We get angry because why? Because we're frustrated. Because why? Because we don't know. Because we don't know
Yes.
how to fix it. Right. So I was using that anger, a secondary emotion, in a negative way instead of using it that all that energy of getting angry in a positive way. I was using it as a negative way with my kid back then, but now I see it as an opportunity to really engage with them and really just kind of hear them out and listen to them and give them that platform. Let them know, hey, bud, you're important to me. Go ahead and let me know what's going on.
Yep.
And it's just amazing to see all the stuff that you can learn out there and just getting with fathers and other men like yourself, other tradesmen, other professionals, and just being able to just really bounce off ideas and see what works for them. And then just try to, like you said, put it in your tool bag and implement it.
Yep.
And it's
Well, we
amazing.
think so much of that all this has to be complicated.
No.
And that's the problem is what do we do in our job? We want to be trained and know enough to where we get to the point where it's keep it simple, stupid, right? Just like the
Mm-hmm.
military, keep it simple, stupid. But we make everything so complicated. We think we've got to do this. Now, granted, therapy and all these other things are fantastic, fantastic opportunities for any man that's struggling. Seek help. If you're a tradesman and you can't get a hold of this, seek help. You are a man if you can admit that you need help. That makes you a bigger man to admit you need help. Because if you can't do it on your own, you've got to work with someone that does know and that can help you.
Mm.
Just like in our jobs, if we don't know something, we've got to seek someone, like the apprenticeship. You learn from people that have been there and done that. Now, do we follow exactly what we learned from each person? No. What we do is we learn from multiple people and use those inputs to find the best way for it to work for us. And this is exactly the same thing. There's a million self-help books. There's a million everything. But we need to remember to keep it simple. This is not complicated. Learn to love. Learn to be empathetic. Learn to listen. Learn to stop and walk away before you do or say something that you can't take back. It's just like the internet. Once it's out there, it's always out there. And just as a side note, when I was going through my divorce, my ex-wife told me verbatim stuff that I had said for our 20 plus year marriage from day one. And we've got to remember, of all things, I was really a verbal abusive person. And of all things, on top of listening and everything else, when my biggest thing now, the one thing I've learned with listening to your podcasts and the men on your podcast and listening to your life and our life experiences is a lot of times I bite my tongue. I shut up because my first response is to react. And part of it's training and part of it's just my personality. And as fathers, just like you did, instead of freaking out, you put yourself at your son's level, you talk to him, and then you waited for him to respond. We forget that their emotions are a lot more raw than ours. We've had time to step back and polish ourselves. I've always been guilty of two faces. I have a public face and a private face. And my public face was polished. Man, I got it down. And my private face, it's a disaster. And it's because I never learned to shut up, to listen, and to not make it about myself. And you're very fortunate that your children are of an age that you're able to reach them and start rebonding.
Yes.
And we need to remind all these men out there, no matter what your trade is, whatever you're doing, even if you're at whatever it is in your life, you're a father. And if you're not a father, you're going to be a father. And if you're not that, you've got a father. If he's still around, praise you. But we need to become the men that we are, both private and public. We need to live both. There's no two sides of life. There's one person, one life, and we need to be the best in all of it. And first and foremost, to our children and our spouses.
And I think that being that best, a lot of people might say that sounds selfish, but in reality, it's not. And I attribute that to the airplane effect, I call it, right? With that being said, the airplane effect is when you go on an airplane. What's the first thing they say? You got to put on your mask first before you're going to help out your loved ones, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Isn't that what they say? Okay.
You can't help anybody if you're already down.
Exactly. Yep. So take care of yourself. And that goes emotionally, spiritually, physically.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And let's go even a little deeper, Will. Let's tie that into, I'll go ahead and use my brother as an example. God rest his soul. He passed away in October. This guy was pinnacle of health. He's probably the strongest man I've ever met. And my background, Will, just being a lineman in the military and stuff like that. I've met some strong people, and this kid was strong. With that being said, we found out that he had significant heart disease. Nothing that he ever thought. He never complained about, tightness in the chest. He never complained that he had, he couldn't breathe or anything like that. He never had any pains radiating down his left arm. None of the symptoms that you would think. He never went to the doctor. He's one of those guys, like every lineman. I don't even go to the doctor unless it's like, I fell off my roof and broke my leg, and I went to the doctor and they're like, how are you walking? Your leg's broken. And I'm like, well, it don't hurt. I'm one of them dudes that if it ain't sticking out of your skin and poking you in the eye, like a Chinese spare rib, you don't go to the doctor. You know what I mean? with that being
Exactly. Yeah,
said,
you better be on your deathbed.
exactly. And with that being said, the point I'm trying to make here, Will, is that we need to start taking care of ourselves. I mean, we need to start making them checks. We need to start going to the doctors, start seeing what's going on. My little brother, we thought he was perfectly healthy. He passed away at 38 years old, the day before his birthday, killed a bull elk, overexerted himself. And because of this underlying condition that no one knew of, heart disease, he had a massive heart attack. His heart exploded in his chest. He left 3 daughters. The
Yes.
youngest one, 2.
Oh,
And it's heartbreaking. And the reason why I say this is not to get sympathy from anybody or anything like that. The reason why I say it is because it's a big deal. Now we're having to pick up the pieces for him. Now both my dad and I are both having to be the fathers that to his daughters that they're not going to have. Their dad is gone. He's
yes.
never going to show up. We talk about the show up dad showing up, you know, he's
Yep.
never, he's a guy he's a father who's never going to be able to show up. He's a father who's not going to be able to walk his daughters down that aisle when they get married,
Yep.
and it's simply because I'm macho. Nothing bothers me. I don't get sick. I don't go to the doctor. I don't need to go to the doctor. I can't get off work. I got to work. I got to support my kids.
Yep.
All these things that we put first, and we think we're doing our families a great
Yep.
service,
Yeah.
but we're not. We're not. We're playing, and we're playing like we are, but we're really not.
No.
We're being selfish, and it goes back to that theory, like I said, about the mask. Take care of yourself first, because you're not going to be good for your families if you're 6 feet in the ground. You're not going to be good for your families when you're not around. And
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because too many times when we've had these podcasts, I focus on the things that are near and dear to my heart. The listening, the empathy, the showing love and things like that. But you're absolutely right, and I've heard you stress it over and over. Your physical health
mm-hmm.
is as important as your mental health. Those two are tied together and linked forever, physiologically. And if it's plain and simple, if you're sick, your mind isn't good. If you're bodily sick, your mind isn't good. We That is ridiculously important. I know as tradesmen, linemen have a pretty decent diet. At least the time when I came up, we had alcohol and any other thing. But it was that was quite the diet.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, it was as detrimental physically as it is mentally. And I'm not picking on anybody that drinks. I'm not picking on anybody that has anything. But just like you said, it's as we work. What my excuse always was? I have a physical job. I work all day, 10, 12 hours a day. I don't need to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? Exercise can be as simple as something that can be incorporated into your family. Let's go walk around the park together.
Exactly.
It doesn't cost a single thing. All it costs is time, and it's time that is so valuable. You want to put a dollar sign on something? Go for a walk with your children at the end of a day, a long, hard day, and let them dance around you and be exuberant and hold your hand and yell at you and do cartwheels and everything. And you tell me how much that is worth. There isn't enough money on earth.
Damn, that's a good point, brother. That was a really good point. Wow. Yeah, no, it's our job to teach them. It's our job to help build successful adults, not not to teach them how to stay as a dependent child the rest of their life. And I think we're seeing that in society. There's 30-year-old sons now that are in their mom and dad's basement, addicted to pornography, playing video games all day, wearing, skinny jeans. What I mean? and they're not leaving their homes. They've lost their inclination to want to be fathers. And it's kind of sad to say it's, but society has kind of emasculated them. I
Well,
mean, look how many times we see, I'm sorry to interrupt you, brother, but look how many
no,
times
go
we
ahead.
see, prime example, Homer Simpson. He's a
Yeah,
father and he's an oaf.
yeah.
That's just an example of what
We're
television
being fed.
shows, what we're being
What
fed.
kids are being fed,
Exactly.
and young adults, and
Hmm.
middle-aged adults. Uh, you said it perfectly. God put us together to be a husband first and a father second.
Hmm.
That's God's. He put this together. The first thing He put on earth, the first organization of all, was marriage, and
Hmm.
what followed? Being a father, being a parent. And you're right. We've emasculated these young men, and we've done it socially. And Nathan brought it up. He said, their peers from 7 to 30 are the ones that are most influential on their lives.
Hmm.
And he's absolutely right. So and this comes to another point that he brought up that was so powerful. As he was making time for his son, he got where he and his son could communicate.
Hmm.
A Saturday, they took a Saturday and they spent that time together, got something to eat, went and watched a movie.
Hmm.
But then he started inviting his son's friends.
Yeah, I like that.
And we've got and I never thought about that. As a father to a boy or a girl,
Hmm.
we not only need to be involved in their lives, but we need to know who they're involved with in their lives.
Hmm.
And we have the power to influence those people who are influencing them for most of their lives, for most of the hours of the day.
Hmm. I like that, and just to touch on that, my old, just giving my old man props. He used to always tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And he made
Well,
it a point to make sure to see who my friends were, who I was coming, who was coming around my house. I'm not going to say any names, but I had this one kid that would come over to my house. My dad, for whatever reason, your father, you see a bad egg, you pick up on a bad vibe, whatever. And my dad must have had this intuition, and he straight up told me, I don't want that kid at my house. Every time he comes here, he's scoping out your house. He's like, I don't want him here. He's going to wind up dead or in prison. You know, Needless to say, the guy wound up dead and in prison. He actually died going into prison. He was smuggling a balloon. He keistered it and was smuggling it into prison, and the balloon popped, and he died, overdosed. So that's how much influence my father had on me. Just him telling me to watch out for those kids, and him being intentional and being like, hey, I want to see your friends, bring them over here. You know what I mean? Let's go chop wood, let's go shoot. Because that's what we did. We were very rambunctious. My father,
yes.
he didn't take us to he didn't take us to the park and all that stuff. My dad was the dad who took us to the mountains. He took us fishing, he
Yep.
took us hunting. We picked up bales, we fixed fences, and that's what we did. And all the kids around, they didn't have fathers who did that. So they thought it was really cool. And I thought it was really cool too, because now they wanted to hang out with my dad. And I'm, as a kid, you don't think your dad's cool. I know I didn't. I wanted to hang out with the girls, chase after the girls and stuff like that. I wanted to, who wants to go to the ranch and pick up 1,800 bills? Hot, sweaty summer. I didn't. I had a brand new truck. I wanted to go chase after the girls, but as soon as my dad started saying, invite your friends, bring them over, I'm like, oh, they're not going to want to do this. Heck no, dude. I had 4 or 5 dudes right away. Hey, yeah, we want to go pick up bills. We could go fishing afterwards. I'm like, really? Like, yeah, that's cool. Okay. So
Yep.
just being that intentional father and just really caring for who you hang around with, and
Oh,
being intentional and seeing who your kids are hanging around with is definitely a must, like Nathan talked about.
yes. He did touch on that. And one of the things I really highlighted was bad company.
Yes.
You know,
Corrupts good
and
character.
the Bible talks about it also. It's
Mhm.
you know, if from a Christian point of view, you don't go into a bar to save drunks,
No.
because what happens? You join the crowd, you become a
Mhm.
drunk, and we're humans that want to be communal. We want to get together,
Mhm.
and if we're as fathers, we need to be intentional with our children so we can see the kids they're around. But we also got to be very aware. We don't put on the old rose-colored glasses and say my children are perfect. I've known a lot of parents like that.
Yeah.
And of course, I was the exact opposite. I made sure my kids weren't causing the cause of the trouble. When I was growing up, the kids that
Mhm.
hung around with me, their parents knew I was the problem child. So we've got to be aware of that as fathers and as parents. We've got to be aware, and that right there comes back to being involved
Yes.
and listening and paying attention, watching, to make sure that our kids aren't the ones leading other kids astray, you
Mhm.
know, because that puts it in front row for us. We need to straighten up. One of the things that he said that really blew my mind was when his son was acting out. He's like, he tells his clients in counseling, the first thing he needs to ask himself is, did my kid learn that from me?
Hmm.
Oh, mercy. That
Yeah.
that was a ooh, that was a tough one for me, man, because my children,
Mhm.
all of my daughters, have traits just like me. And they're not real positive traits. I
Mhm.
mean, so exactly. And it goes right back to that. If your father said, let me know your friends and I'll know who you are. And
Mhm.
yeah, as fathers, we best be engaged to know everything about our children, and they do have to have their own privacy,
Yeah.
but they have their whole lives to have a private life. Our job is to make sure that we give them the opportunity to be the best person they can be as they step out into their life.
Yeah. I once heard it said that, in fact, Nathan said this, and I thought it was really awesome. Said it's not our jobs as parents to make our children happy, but it is our jobs to provide the area, the atmosphere for that happiness to take place.
Man,
Yeah, that was
that's
deep.
ridiculously true.
Hmm.
And it goes back to KISS. How hard is it?
Hmm.
We've got to, as fathers, and this really was brought forward to me by Nathan, was even though he had failings in his personal life,
Hmm.
he strove to be there for his son. And it's never too late. I mean,
Never.
it's never too late. Even if they're adults and you know what? Reach out,
Mm.
take the time. If they don't respond, don't be offended, you know,
Hmm.
because even if you do a text, a video chat, whatever, those are that still, as a father, your influence never stops.
Never.
Never. And whether it's positive or negative, you can still turn it around because you can still add net positive things to negative situations. They have a lot of negative memories, but you can add positive back to it. Tell them, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm glad you're doing that. I fully support you. You're going to be great at it. As adults, I think if we as parents, I as a parent
Hmm.
had failed as a father when they were young, it's more important for me now to be a father as they are learning to be young adults,
Mm.
and to help them as my oldest is become as they become parents, to help them overcome the obstacles I could not.
Mm.
So we get a chance to be a father till our dying day.
Mm.
And we pray to the Lord that it's old and a ripe age so that we can live long enough to be a problem to our children. I mean,
Hmm.
that's awesome. Isn't that what we all want? It's like, oh man, that's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But it's so true. We think fatherhood ends when they leave outside that door. We are never let off the hook.
No.
And the sooner we recognize as fathers,
Hmm.
one of the things Nathan said that really cracked me up, and it's so true. is if I use my past, it becomes a learning weapon. But it's no good if someone uses my past against me. So isn't it better for us to get out ahead of our past and use it as a teaching and as a learning weapon to help our children? Because we are always going to be fathers, always.
That's interesting that you said that we're always going to be fathers. One of our guests that we haven't aired that podcast yet. It's coming up this week. But Stephen Poulter, he's a licensed clinical physician, or he's an actual doctor, right? And highly successful, wrote a tremendous amount of books. Anyhow, the point I'm getting at is he talked about you are a dad for life.
Oh, amen.
You are a dad for life. You know what I mean? And once he said that, and another one of the things that he talked about, what are your kids going to say at your funeral? What are your kids going to say at your funeral when you pass away?
Oh,
yeah.
Ouch. Ouch.
Mm-hmm. Are they going to say that you're a loving father, an accepting father, an understanding father, one who provided stability? Or are they going to say, oh, yeah, that guy, man, I'm glad he's gone. You know, what did he leave us?
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
it's good to have that emotional connection with our children. We have to, you know what I mean? Boys, right? I've been told that boys need boundaries, which will lead into a relationship with them. Okay. Girls are completely opposite. Girls need a relationship before you can have boundaries for them. So you need to establish a relationship with them. And one of the things Nathan talked about, and I've been utilizing this even with my wife, is taking Post-its.
Amen. Yes.
Taking Post-its and putting, you know, for my daughter, I did it for my wife, you know, writing down words of affirmation and just putting it where they can see it. And it might sound corny or whatever, but at the end of the day, we're trying to raise healthy young adults. I don't want a daughter who's going into her 20s and 30s seeking help because of something I created that I did, or boys and girls, you know, or my sons, right?
Yep.
So we can look at this and be like, oh, that's corny. Post-its, who has time for that? I'm a lineman or whatever. But at the end of the day, who cares? We're trying, you know, the goal is to raise these healthy young adults.
Well, you know, Harry Chapin has that song about him working and his son. He comes home and his son says, "Hey, Dad, you know, can we play?" Later, son, later. And then he gets into his old age and he calls his son and said, "Hey, can you come by and visit? Can I come by and visit?" And the son says, "Nah, Dad, I'm too busy."
Wow.
You know, at some point, we're going to get to the point in our lives where we want to be around our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
We should be aspiring to work harder now so that we can be there for them and that they can be there for us.
Wow. Yeah, it's a reciprocal. Wow. Yeah, that's deep, brother. One of the things I wanted to say, man, that really struck me hard is when Nathan talked about, let's go back to daughters, okay? He talked about how dads are idols to their children, right? Said they're providers, they got to be there, they got to be solid, right? And then he talked about how daughters get to their teenage years, dads who don't know how to communicate, who haven't built up that relationship, right? When they're young, go in the opposite of directions when they're directions from their teenage daughters. Once they get to the teenage years, you can't wrestle with them like you did when they were younger because they're developing and stuff like that, right?
Sure.
So now you don't even know how to mess with them. You know, they're developed, they're becoming young women, and you don't have those communication skills there because why? You didn't implement that into your program. You didn't take the time to figure out what they like. You know, what's their favorite color? You know, that's one of the things I always ask some of my fathers. What do you know about your children? What's your child's favorite color? What's her favorite song? What's her favorite movie? Dude, they look at me like Not to put them down or nothing like that. Some of them get that look like apprentice gives you when you tell them to go pick out a tool and they look at you like a cow looks at a brand new cattle guard. You know what I mean? They're like, oh,
What?
what? And it's true. And I mean, I'm guilty of the same thing. Once someone asked me that, I'm like, what do you mean my daughter's favorite color? I know she likes horses, but I don't know. I don't know her favorite color. And it's just little simple questions like that we need to make the time. One of the past guests that we had on here was a hostage negotiator. He's an ex police officer from California. He was a hostage negotiator, and he touched base on how to communicate with your children. And one of the things he talked about was being able to create that time using open-ended questions.
Yes.
To create a dialogue, to gain their trust so that they actually want to talk to you. They're not so closed. And I thought that was really important. I thought that was awesome that Nathan was able to. It's cool that we do this podcast, Will, because we get to see different aspects. I mean, we've had hostage negotiators here. We've had linemen on here. We've had a plumber on here. We've had, professionals on here like Nathan, and then Steve Poulter, Dr. Steve Poulter, who's going to be on later on this week. And I mean, it's so awesome that we get to get these people as guests on here. We get to use their information and put it together and just bring it out to these fathers.
Sure.
And hopefully they can just take it for what it's worth, take what they need, glean it, whatever they don't need, throw it away, and then just take it and put it in your arsenal. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to help fathers out, and what is probably one of the most significant things that you got out of this podcast that Nathan had? I know there's so many different relevant points he made that was just unbelievable. But what was the number one thing that you saw that really stuck to you, that really resonated with you, that really just grasped you by your hair and your chin?
That he learned to serve others. And he started with trying to be the best father he could. And he kept morphing, he kept changing, because he wanted to be that for his son. He wanted to make sure that, like he said, I want to set a bar. If my son's going to follow in my footsteps, I'm going to set the bar so high that he's always going to have to work at it, But the fact that from where he started and how it started, and how even he'd fall back, he'd take a step back, like he said, God took him out of a situation to give him time to wake him up so that he could follow forth as the father, as the leader. And where he is now as a counselor, the fact that it hits me so strongly that when you can serve others, if you can serve your children and you can serve your wife, and I'm not talking about being subservient, that's totally a different thing. That's not even the same thing, but learning to serve them lovingly and be there for them and to hear them. And God takes that and moves it everywhere in your life. That influence starts there, and you learn to serve there, and it takes it into your personal life outside of your home. It takes it into your personal life as you walk into a grocery store. Strangers will come up and want to approach you and just have a conversation with you. When he talks, and his whole journey, everybody has to listen to it. His journey from where he was in a very, very prideful, self-indulgent lifestyle. I mean, honestly, that's what it was pride and self-indulgent, to being the servant he is today. And what amazes me is how humble he is about being a servant, and how much it comes across that he loves it. And that's what struck me, is his journey took him to where we should all start, right? and his path was long and wide, and some of our paths are long and wide, and some are deep and dark, and some are, some people get ahead of the game. You're ahead of the game, and praise God for that. But yeah, just learning to be a servant, learning to be what God called us to be. I mean, at the end of the day, what is a father? He's a servant to the needs of others that are more important than himself, but not to use their good as an excuse for him to check out.
Hmm. I like that. That's awesome that you touched on that. I never thought of it that way. Yeah, one of the things that Nathan touched on was feelings come and go, right? And he uses Dr. Carolyn Leaf's belief on think, feel, choose. Okay. You got to think about your goal, and your outcome will produce those positive feelings. If you start feeling first, it throws it all out of whack. You can't go off of your feelings, how you feel that day, because then it's just going to be a mess. So you got to take that opportunity to step back, look at it. Don't be angry, right? Step back. And I mean, this even goes back to utilizing this in a form of discipline. Don't discipline your children when you're angry. Step back,
Step back.
Think about it, feel it, and then choose those consequences. Let them, our goal is to guide them to see that, hey, this is not the right path. This is what's going to happen. You keep going down this path. Smoking, one of the things he talked about is he was an example. He used to smoke a lot. That was one of his vices that he went to, and he was smoking. Well, his kid picked up smoking. Well, he said that he felt like an idiot, or, those aren't his exact words, but, he felt kind of weird telling his kid not to smoke when he smoked. But he started saying, okay, well, I don't smoke anymore now. One of the reasons is because they're showing that I had heart damage. It's probably from the drugs as well, but he's like, I don't smoke anymore. He's like, and these are the consequences of smoking. If you continue smoking, these are the consequences that could possibly happen to you. Are you willing to do it? And if you're cool with that, go ahead, continue. But I think it's our job as parents to lay out those consequences and then let them make a decision. We should have been able to influence them enough in their life to where they're going to pick a positive decision, a positive outcome, and which will eventually lead into a positive outcome for them, a victory. Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to do as fathers, is be able to influence our children to be able to make those correct decisions. That was my biggest take. Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway from him. I mean, like I said, there's so many different points that he touched base on. And for you guys listening out there, if you haven't listened to The Influence of a Father with Nathan Padilla, I mean, it's such a powerful, powerful story. I mean, you're going to be blessed from it. I know we were, and everybody else who's listened to it was just like blown away about his struggles and how he turned his life a true rags to riches. I mean, the guy didn't come from being poor. I mean, his choices led him to be poor and on the street, to where he was able to overcome all that mess and damage he had created in his life by a void that had happened to him by him losing his father and being angry, to becoming a father and wanting to live for his kids. I talked about this on several podcasts. A lot of fathers will say, I will die for my family. I will die for my kids. Well, Nathan Padilla chose to live for his son.
Amen. Amen. That's absolutely the truth. And he lived it out. He didn't just choose that. He followed through, and like you keep saying, part of doing the work is the follow through, and you don't, being a man, we forget this, we can beat our chests and, all this other crap we do as men that is so ridiculous and fun. But we got to remember, being a man is being the ever-present leader. And being a leader is whether you like it or not. You don't get
Hmm.
an option. You don't get to step back from being a man. You are a man. And you need to remember that with that comes consequences.
Hmm. Yeah, that was deep, brother. There's consequences to everything we do, man.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Well,
But make
Will,
them positive consequences.
exactly. Make them positive. Well, Will, thank you once again for being on this podcast, brother. I know that it's going to help a tremendous amount of people. Your podcast, for you guys who are listening right now, if you haven't heard Lineman Chronicles Volume 1 with Will Monzingo, it's my special guest on tonight. You don't know what you're missing. I mean, that was such a solid, positive podcast that he put together. And he really opened up and he dove deep into some of his personal demons that he had to deal with into to being that engaged father that he is today. And by no means is he perfect. None of us are, but he's putting in that work and he's making forth that effort to be that engaged, committed, responsible father. With that being said, Will, do you have anything to add to this podcast before we end it, bud?
Well, David, I just want to continually uplift you in prayer and for what you're doing for all the men that listen to this. Anything you do for the glory of God does not return void.
Mm.
And also, I lift up in prayer, whether you believe or not, I lift all you men up that listen and all you men that listen and share it with somebody else. That you, just like David said, you take one piece of one podcast and you work it and you use it and you use it to the glory of your family and ultimately to the glory of God. And
Mm.
David, just keep doing what you're doing, brother, because it is impactful. It is impactful, and you're living it as you're learning it, as you're teaching it. And I don't think we could ask for a better example than that.
Well, amen, brother. Thank you for all the words of affirmation, bro. I mean, truly needed, especially during this time. You know, um, it's just something that was put on my heart. It was solidified, with my brother passing, and then even before that, with my story with my wife and her almost passing in 2018. So I'm just moving forward with this. We got tremendous amount of success, tremendous amount of people supporting us right now. Line 11 is one of our supporters, big time supporter. Gene Gloudman, another journeyman lineman. He's totally just helping us any which way possible, and we thank him for that. And I just want to thank you, brother, for coming on here, and we'll go ahead and end with that. And man, have a good night, brother.
You too. God bless.
God bless.